Hey, we're gonna talk about communication now. There's the laser pointer. Cool. So, what is communication? Um, well, I guess first, the question I want to ask you is the difference between communication, language, and speech. Do you think that they're all the same thing? Are they just interchangeable? So we can say that we're communicating right now, but does that mean that communication is a synonym of speech? Well, no. It's kind of this inverted pyramid, right? Communication is just like sharing information in some way. Language is, like the English language, and then speech is how I'm conveying the information in that language. So we've put some sounds and symbols to meanings, and that's the language. And then speech is the modality that I'm using to convey that to you. So I could use ASL, I could write it, and those are all different ways, not speech but writing, not speech but signing. Those are different ways that I can convey information to you, but it's still in the same language. And then communication, again, is just exchanging information, which doesn't even have to be done necessarily with the language. So no, they're not exactly interchangeable. They go together, but they're not interchangeable. So the language is what you're actually saying, and speech is how it's said. So again, it could be written, and the language could be a different language, or we could even use something else. So like, instead of American Sign Language, which is based in English, I could just mime to you things like I'm going over there, and that's not necessarily English. That's just a different way to communicate. The other thing is we can pull back quite a ways on communication. I mean, the actual definition of communication is exchange of information through a medium. The exchange of information through a medium. That's not necessarily the definition I think that your book gives you, but that's the definition that we have over in cognitive psychology. And that's what it says underneath this picture that I've got here too. Okay, so this is going to be, it takes 4 minutes, so maybe let's take the playback speed up to 1.75. Okay, so watch these. These are just little metronomes. Look at this line right here, and this one. And the sound. some of them are still not. Like this guy's out. But you can watch it if you stare at this one that's out of sync right here. You can see how it's starting to get in sync with the others. There we go. Looks like they're all in now. I don't know what the other minute of this video is if they're all in sync. Some more of this. I guess it is just more of that. Okay, so that's communication. I mean, you don't even have to have a thinking being in the mix to have communication. It's just you're sending information between two things through a medium. In this case, the medium is this, it's like a foam board kind of thing. And the information is where we are in space, like how we're moving. In fact, if you watch this, now that they're all in sync, you can actually see that the foam board is shaking with the motion. And that's how the information is transmitted. So each one of these is shaking a little bit as its pendulum moves one way and the next, and it influences the ones next to it. So there might be two that are slightly out of sync. Oh, I just went in. There we go. And they'll influence each other until they're in sync. But then when they're in sync, their signal is a little bit amplified because the two of them are moving together. And that'll kind of, move out like ripples in a pond from a drop of water until everything, like you saw, moves in sync with itself. This is true. Let's see. I had two other. Oh, yeah. Okay, so the person who first noticed this was some guy named Christian Huygens. He was on a ship, I think, and he had malaria or yellow fever or something that's transmitted by a mosquito. And so he was in the ship, in the it's like a bedroom, I guess. But so he's laying in there and he's like trying to get well, and the clock is ticking. There's one of these pendulum clocks on the ship, and it's ticking, and it's like driving him crazy, especially because there's another clock somewhere else that on the same wall, and it's clicking too, and they're both clicking together, so it gets really loud. So he's like, oh, I can't get well with this. So he kind of stops the pendulum, sets the one going, and then sets the other one going, and they're ticking independently of each other until they sync up again, and then it drives him nuts again. So then when he gets well, he's like, well, what the heck's going on with these clocks? So he does an experiment where he puts two clocks on two boards that he drives into the ground. They're totally independent of each other, they're not touching in any way, and they never sync up. But as soon as you connect the boards with another board that goes across, and the clocks are now hanging on, the same structure, because you've connected them, then they do sync up. And it's exactly what we just talked about. It's information traveling through a medium. So the information is vibration, which is what sound is, by the way. So we'll learn a lot more about that when we talk about speaking. And the information is vibration, and then they sync up. One sends information, one receives information, and they become part of the same system. This is also true for humans. There's something in London called the Millennium Bridge, and they opened it in the year 2000, as you might expect, but it had a slight problem. What happened was people would walk on it, and people like to walk in sync with each other, especially when they know each other. It works even when you don't know each other. So watch yourself the next time you're walking with a friend or a family member. Your steps are going to be either perfectly in sync or exactly opposite. So you're either going to be using the same leg or the opposite leg, but they're going to be, in time with one another, even though you're not thinking about it. And even though one of you might be quite a bit taller than the other one. So one will slow down, one will speed up. Your legs are different lengths, but the walking pace will sync up. So because this is true about people, especially if you know each other, but even if you don't, you start kind of walking in sync with other people on this bridge. It's a suspension bridge, and then that makes the bridge start to sway slightly. The bridge sways with the gait of the people going across it, and then the swaying of the bridge makes the gait a little bit more pronounced, which then makes the bridge swing a little more, and before you know it, everybody on the Millennium Bridge is swaying back and forth, and they're worried that the bridge is just going to completely collapse. So they had to shut it down for a while and figure out what the heck was going on with the Millennium Bridge. Is there a problem with it? And they couldn't figure out what the problem was. It didn't do it by itself. They could send some people across, they could send bicycles across, and it wouldn't shake. It was only when you had multiple people on the bridge at one time that it started to shake. And it's this sending of information across the medium. In fact, let's see if we can find a video of that really quickly. This is only 20 years ago, but the video footage is like terrible. It looks like it's from the 80s. There's the bridge. It's shaking. And you can even watch the people, you can see them sway with the bridge. See this guy, he's kind of walking back and forth with the movement of the bridge, which is making the bridge move more. I hope they pull out and show us a wider shot of the bridge. Yeah, you can see how crazy the shaking is. All right, so that's communication. It's just simply information moving across the medium, right? It doesn't even have to involve something with a brain. Then we've got language. Language is a code that's agreed on by the users. So the code for us is the different speech sounds that I'm using right now. It's transmitting information to you. It's a code of the letters that we use when we're writing, the letters that are on the screen right now. But it's some sort of code that's agreed on by the users. Communication doesn't necessarily have to be a code that's agreed upon. Vibration between two clocks is not an agreed upon code. They can't agree to it because, they're clocks, right? So there's no agreement happening. It also has rules. A language has rules, which again doesn't always happen in communication, because if you don't have always something with a brain, you can't have rules. Some of our rules are phonemes. Those are the building blocks of sound. Those are what you would think of as, the little, each sound that a letter or a group of letters makes. So each individual vowel or consonant, e, s, ch, k, things like that. Those are all phonemes. The smallest thing that we can actually pull out of sound is a phoneme. The smallest unit that we can actually pull out. Because you could split an E into two parts, but they would sound the same. There's no real meaningful distinction between the two. So the smallest meaningful distinction we can make in the sounds is a phoneme. Then you've got morphemes, which is just, the smallest word unit that you had, the smallest actual meaningful in terms of language unit. So you could have like bear, as in to, like to bear with something, would be a morpheme. And then you could tack other morphemes on to that. So you could have un is another one, able or able is another morpheme. And you could tack those three morphemes together to make unbearable, which then has a different connotation, but each one by itself. Un, not, bear, to take, able, capable of doing. So something is not capable of being taken, right, for unbearable. But unbearable has a lot of different phonemes. In fact, b, air, might be a diphthong. Bull. It's about 8 different phonemes, roughly. And then we've also got rules of syntax, which is how those words are going to go together. How a question is formed is different than how a sentence is formed. There's rules on how the words have to go together to be intelligible. We have rules for when a noun can come in a sentence to be understood as either the subject or the object. So there's rules that are governing even those morphemes and how they go together to be understood. You've got rules for how the morphemes go together too. So unbearable makes sense, but bearable doesn't make sense. So we've got all these different rules governing a language. But then it comes in a whole bunch of different modalities, right? You've got spoken, which was what we're doing, written, which is when you're reading my PowerPoint, signed, so I don't actually, I kind of remember my name. Anyway, I think, it doesn't matter. And then you can use even flags. I don't know if you know semaphore. There's no reason why you would, but this is semaphore. Also, this video is hilarious. I don't know why they film it like...
How to send a rescue signal by semaphore.
So it's teaching you how to send a rescue signal, but the video starts out like a horror movie. You'll see what I mean.
The semaphore flag signaling system is an alphabet-based system that requires waving a pair of handheld flags in particular patterns. Here's how you send a rescue signal using the flags. You will need semaphore flags and a receiving party.
Oh, I have to have somebody to talk to.
The International Code of Signals. Step 1. Get the attention of the person you wish to send the signal to by waving both of your flags repeatedly overhead in a scissor-like motion. Step 2. Wait for the receiving party to send the semaphore letter K with their flags. This is the signal to proceed.
That's always super funny to me, is every time I watch this, somebody's like, oh my gosh, I'm running, I've got this huge problem, and the guy on the other side goes, okay. Anyway, that's semaphore. There's no reason to watch the rest of this. If you want to see the rest, you can look it up yourself. It's purely there mostly for me to make fun of, I guess. But it's another modality that you can use that is based on English and the other rules that we have. It's got some rules of its own, as does the spoken language, written language, and sign language. But it's still based in most of the same rules that we have. So one of the things that's really interesting about language, and this is where some controversy comes up, is that you have to be able to combine and create some of these existing structures to create new information. That's a language. So if we come up with a new word, so when Twitter came around, tweet, was invented. I mean, tweet was already a word, but we came up with a new definition for tweet, right? And so you could say tweetable, like if it was originally 140 characters, although it's longer now, but if it was 140 characters, like you had a thought that was 140 characters, you could say tweetable. That's tweetable. And you're combining it with our previous rules to create a new meaning that didn't used to exist. So we come up with a new term, you can combine it with other rules, and now you've created a new thing. So the first person who ever said tweetable created a completely new, word. It might not have been a new thought, because maybe people were trying to figure out, how to send messages that were 140 characters before somebody said tweetable, but it was definitely putting a word to that thought. Like, how do I send this message in a small package? It'd be nice if they still kept 140 characters, because sometimes they just get so long. Anyway, so you can combine these. You can break some of these rules down. Some of these, portions that we have invented, like rules of what a phoneme is. You can take the phonemes down to their constituent parts and create new words. You can create new morphemes. What's a new word? A completely new word, not like tweet. Well, I had one that I had figured out the other day, a new word that didn't exist. It's not important. We'll figure out what it is. Why don't you let me know if you can think of a word that's come around recently that didn't used to exist. So it's not taking another word, like tweet was already a thing, but what is something that's a completely new word? Like slap doesn't work because it was already a thing, but something completely new. Anyway, doesn't matter. The point is, we know that they exist. We know that we can do it. And then we can also put the existing rules with them. There are rules of pluralization, our rules of tacking on other morphemes, and create completely new thoughts. And this is a cognitive process, right? So this is all done here. The speech effectors, or the hand, if you're writing or signing, don't really come into this yet. It's all cognitive. You choose the words, you use the semantic rules, you create new words with different phonemes. This is all done in the brain. And then you end up saying it or writing it, but that is a separate process. So the language part is a cognitive thing. In fact, some of you are enrolled in my language science class right now, and all we're talking about is cognitive stuff. It's very much a psychology class, because it's all cognitive. It's all happening in your brain. Some of you may have taken speech science with me last semester, and we didn't really talk about the brain aspect of it a whole lot until the very end when we talked about speech perception. That's because speech is more of a motor process than it is a cognitive process. I mean, there's a link. The cognitive process creates the motor signals to go out, but we can separate them into two things and talk about them as completely different things. So here's where the controversy comes up. Animals definitely communicate. This is the Bee Waggle Dance.
Honeybees have some fascinating abilities, among them being able to communicate by performing a unique dance. It informs hive mates where a newly discovered food source is located. Every cycle of this waggle dance roughly describes the shape of the figure eight. Let's rewind and look in more detail. The bee only waggles on a part of its route, the straight run, indicated here by the waved line. The secret lies in the direction of the straight run, or to be more precise, in the angle between the straight run and the perpendicular, which in this case is 90 degrees to the left. This tells the other bees that food is available 90 degrees to the left of the sun. If the angle is 60 degrees to the right, they'll be flying 60 degrees to the right of the sun.
Okay, so that's definitely communication. But is it language? Are the bees breaking down the structure of the communication and rebuilding it to create new information? Yes, they're able to represent the angle that the food is from the sun, but is that creating new information? Would they be able to say what kind of... I mean, first of all, is that new information? Is coming up with a new angle new information? Or is it kind of just their method of communication is based on angles? So any new angle that they come up with isn't really a new angle. It's just using that same rule. Right? You can have rules, but those rules have to be able to create new information. So if we're not creating new information, if we don't consider a new angle a new piece of information, then it's not really a language, it's just communication. But it gets even murkier, because I think maybe we could all possibly be swayed to say, okay, I guess the bees aren't really communicating by creating new information, although maybe they are, and we haven't seen it yet. But what about dogs? I have 2 dogs, and it definitely seems like they can use the way that they bark at me and the way that they look at things and, use their paws to come up with new things that they're telling me about. They're using whatever rules their language have. Not that they have an innate language, but they've definitely created one based on the way that they interact with me and what barks they use to create new information. I mean, when I got them and they wanted something, it was a bark. But now, there's definitely different barks. When somebody's here that they don't know, it's a different sound than when they want dinner, right? Or when they want to go out for a walk. Like, there's a completely different bark. There's a completely different behavior that they will give you. One of them kind of comes up and turns her head and kind of looks like she's going to bite your pants and then turns. So it's kind of like this is when they want you to go somewhere to let them out. But if it's for food, they don't do that. They'll go look at the food. So there's definitely things that they do to create new information. At least I see that. Though then there are other people, other linguists who say, no, that's not exactly creating new information. And so this is where the controversy really comes in. What constitutes breaking things down and creating new information? I mean, we have a good idea of what isn't that, and that's the clock. We have a good idea of what does that, and that's us with language. But where do we draw the line exactly?